I'm not as think as I smart I am. I'm not as think as I smart I am. I'm not as think as I thought I might be, for that's clear anybody to see. I'm not as think as I smart I am. I'm not as think as I smart I am. I'm not as think as I clever I would be. I'm not half as clever as me.
Hi, welcome to the third episode of the Brains Matter podcast. I'm your host, The Ordinary Guy, and I'll be bringing you stories on science, curiosities, and general knowledge. And only being the third episode of this podcast, there's a lot of room for improvement, and I hope to improve as time goes on. Thanks to all of those people who have sent me feedback and emails. I'll be taking on board a lot of your comments, and several of you have asked some very interesting questions, so I'll endeavour to try and answer those over the course of either just this episode or the next few episodes. And first up, a story on ancient footprints found in Mexico. It turns out that a trail of 13 fossilized footprints have been found in a desert in northern Mexico, and scientists think that these could be among the oldest found in the Americas. Archaeologist Yuri de la Rosa Gutierrez of Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History says that these footprints are between about 10,000 and 15,000 years old, and he says that they've got evidence of hunter-gatherers in the Cajali Desert from more than 10,000 years ago. Apparently the oldest footprints discovered in the Western Hemisphere are in Chile, and they're believed to be about 13,000 years old. About 6,000-year-old footprints have been found in California, Brazil, and Nicaragua, and these are fairly old. It makes us wonder about the migration of the human species over the course of time, but these are nothing in comparison to some of the very old footprints that have been found in Africa, which are believed to be 3.5 million years old. The next story is one that's been in the press a little bit lately. It's about Leonardo da Vinci, not the Ninja Turtle, but the artist and inventor and scientist from Renaissance Italy. It turns out that fingerprint analysis has proved that he's actually got Arab heritage. Now, as you know, fingerprints are unique from individual to individual, apart from twins and so forth, but the science of dermatoglyphics has shown that there's a link between the fingerprint styles and the populations. The study of the patterns on Leonardo's fingerprints point to the fact that he's got Middle Eastern heritage, and it's believed that his mother was a Middle Eastern slave. Alessandro Vezzosi claims that Leonardo's father was a craftsman called San Piero da Vinci, and he owned a Middle Eastern female slave named Caterina, and she's believed to be Leonardo's mother. And here's some research which might surprise quite a few of you. Michael Murphy from the University of Cambridge is amongst many scientists who have done some research which have found that constants of nature may not have been constant all the time. And he says there's no reason that these constants should be constant. These are famous numbers in physics, but we have no real reason for why they are what they are. The observed differences they have found were only a few parts in a million, but the implications of those are huge. The laws of physics would have to be rethought, and we might need to make room for 6 more spatial dimensions than the 3 that we're used to, but this falls quite in line with string theory, which talks about 11 different dimensions, but we can only experience 4 of those. Murphy's research was based on some study of quasars, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes, so have a look at the website and you can look up that article in a bit more detail there. And BBC News reports that a US-based environmental charity has documented the 10 most polluted places on the planet, and some of these places include Dzernisk in Russia, which was a Cold War chemical weapons site, Linfen in China's coal industry, Kabwe in Zambia, which has got a lot of mining and smelting of metals, including lead, Haina in the Dominican Republic, where they actually do battery recycling, and Ranipet in India, where more than 3 million people are affected by tannery waste. Apart from many other environmental concerns, one of the main aims of this particular charity is to promote the cleanup of these places and to actually promote a healthier world that we live in. So how far would you go to improve your brain power? There's an exhibit at the London Science Museum called Neurobotics, The Future of Thinking, and it investigates how medical technology could boost our brains. There's a Professor John Gruzilia, who's a professor of psychology at Goldsmith College in London, who found that studying 97 students from the Royal College of Music, that by shocking the brain with electrical signals, you could actually improve your brain capacity and performance by as much as 17%. That's a significant improvement, but I don't think I'd want to go through several shocks to my brain and nervous system to try and achieve that. I don't know, would you? And for all those people who've wanted to learn a new language for as long as they can remember but never quite gotten around to it, American scientists have invented a little bilingual device called the Tower of Babel. I'm sure the Tower of Babel is just a nickname for it, but in effect what this little device does is it measures people's speech patterns and facial expressions and converts that to another language. So what it can do at the moment, there's two type of prototypes. One translates Chinese into English, another can translate English into Spanish or German. It only has a vocabulary of about 100 or 200 words, and they work with about an 80% accuracy rate. But this is just the first step into something that could possibly become more useful for travellers in the future. And as many of the listeners out there would know, the driest continent on Earth is none other than where I live right now, Australia. There's news in Wired.com which says that Australia is about to build the world's biggest solar power plant amid warnings of blackouts within 5 years unless it can increase electricity generation to meet growing demands for air conditioners. Now, with global warming afoot, the temperatures of not just Australia but everywhere around the world is going to increase by, say, predict about 2 or 3 degrees over the next 10 to 50 years or so. And it's become quite topical because Tony Blair's just talked about a report that he's received, and he's called it the most important report that he's ever read during his political career, and it's all about climate change and global warming. John Howard, the esteemed or not so esteemed, depending on your point of view, Australian Prime Minister, refuses to change his stance on the environment and global warming, which is stick your head in the sand and do nothing. But the Dutch Prime Minister, the British Prime Minister, and many other leaders around the world are actually sticking their hand up and doing something about it. It just seems to be the American government and the Australian government which are lagging well behind the times. The report was actually written by former World Bank economist Sir Nicholas Stern, and he warned there was a window of opportunity of only about 10 to 15 years for nations to act. The report says what most people in the world of science knew anyway, and that was that the impact of global poverty, conflict and mass migration due to climate change far outweighs the cost of taking urgent action to counter global warming. And the report will underpin efforts to reach a new global deal to combat climate change when the Kyoto Protocol Agreement agrees in 2012. With a lot of elections coming up soon, especially in Australia, it's interesting to see a lot of politicians who previously didn't have much to say on the environment start to use it as an election platform. So it's interesting that when their power or their hip pockets affected, all of a sudden it interests them. But scientists and intellectuals from the past 20 years have been jumping up and down about it and trying to convince them for absolutely ages. One of the companies to actually put their money where their mouth is and do something about it is that world technology company, Google. Google are actually going to put in a solar electricity system for their Mountain View, California-based headquarters with a total capacity of 1.6 megawatts. And that's enough to supply 1,000 average homes. And the Google headquarters will be the largest solar installation on any corporate campus in the United States and one of the largest on any corporate site in the world. The Japanese company Sharp will provide 9,212 solar panels and these will be primarily placed on rooftops of the buildings in the Google campus, and they'll provide the electricity, and they will therefore no longer need the coal or nuclear generated power that they would otherwise need. So I know that one of my listeners out there is a huge big Google fan, so I can agree with you there in saying Google's actually doing something really, really good apart from their nice websites and search engines. Now it's time for today's brain teaser. So what part of the body is the fastest healer? The answer to that later in the show. We all know how big the Earth is at the moment. We take plane flights from one continent to another. We know how long it takes us. We can calculate how far we've gone and at what speed we've gone and figure out the distance in that way. It's just simple physics and simple mathematical calculations. But how did the Greeks so long ago figure out the size of the Earth? Eratosthenes, who lived around 250 BC, was the first man we know of to figure out the size of the Earth. Yet he never travelled around the Earth, nor did he have any of today's measuring equipment. So how did he then do it? Eratosthenes used Euclid's principles of geometry to solve the problem. First, he learnt that at noon on the longest day of the year, the sun shone straight down to the bottom of a well in the Egyptian city of Syene. At the same time, in the city of Alexandria, the sun caused an upright post to cast on the ground a shadow shaped like a right angle, a triangle with one 90-degree angle. Eratosthenes then measured the other angles and found that one angle was equal to 1/50th of an entire circle. He then determined that if the lines formed at the post in Syene and the well at Alexandria were extended downward, they would form two sides of another right angle at the centre of the Earth. Again, using geometry, Eratosthenes proved that one angle of the second triangle was equal to one angle of the first triangle, or 1/50th of an entire circle. Since the Earth's circumference between Syene and Alexandria formed an arc, that arc was also equivalent to 1/50th of the Earth's circumference. Eratosthenes knew that the distance between Syene and Alexandria was 5,000 stadia, which was an ancient measure used at the time. So he multiplied it by 50 and found that the distance around the Earth was 250,000 stadia, or 24,670 miles. So how close was he? The circumference of the Earth is now known to be 24,900 miles, so he was only about 230 miles off, so it's quite a feat considering it was 250 BC. And now it's time for the answer to today's brain teaser. So did you figure out what part of the body heals itself the fastest? The answer to that is the tongue. The tongue also happens to be the strongest muscle in the body as well. I'm sure you got that one right. And the next story comes to us courtesy of a request from Andy in Melbourne, Australia. Andy wanted to know about zero-point energy. And to be totally frank, I didn't know very much about zero-point energy, but I did a little bit of research and here's what I found, and hopefully it'll answer some of the questions that you have, Andy, and also some of the questions that some of the other listeners have. So what is zero-point energy? Zero-point energy is the energy that remains when all other energy is removed from a system. The phrase is used a lot in quantum mechanical physics, and in quantum field theory it's a synonym for vacuum energy, which is the amount of energy associated with the vacuum of empty space. In cosmology, the vacuum energy is taken to be the origin of the cosmological constant. So if you take away all the energy, all the extra energy out of a particular region of space, what is left is the background radiation, or the cosmological constant. And a lot of people have thought that if you can extract the energy from a zero-point energy system, then in effect you get free energy. And in a reference from the Wikipedia site, they talk about some experimental evidence for zero-point energy. And what it says in the article there is that the simplest experimental evidence for the existence of zero-point energy in a quantum field theory is the Caspari Effect. The effect was proposed in 1948 by Dutch physicist Hendrik B.G. Casimir, who considered the quantized electromagnetic field between a pair of grounded neutral metal plates. A small force can be measured between the plates, which is directly ascribable to a change of the zero-point energy of the electromagnetic field between the plates. Although the Casimir effect at first proved hard to measure because its effects can only be seen at very small distances, the effect is taking on increasing importance in nanotechnology. Not only is the Casimir effect easily and accurately measured in specifically designed nanoscale devices, but it increasingly needs to be taken into account in the design and manufacturing process of such small devices. It can exert significant forces and stress on nanoscale devices, causing them to bend, twist, stick and break. And the Casimir effect has established zero-point energy as a scientifically acceptable phenomenon. However, the term zero-point energy has become associated with a highly controversial area of human endeavour, the design and invention of so-called free energy devices, which is what we talked about earlier. It looks like I'll have to do a little bit more reading and research into that and then report back to you at a later date on another show. But I hope that whets your appetite a little bit, Andy, and thank you for your email. And that brings to a close episode number 3 of the Brains Matter podcast. So thank you for listening. And if you have any comments, questions or suggestions, drop me an email at brainsmatterinbox@gmail.com. Brainsmatterinbox is all one word. Or leave a comment on the website, and the website's address is www.brainsmatter.com. Please let me know where in the world you live and how you found the podcast. Music used on today's show comes courtesy of the PodSafe Audio Network. You can find the podcast by doing a search within iTunes or subscribing manually at feeds.feedburner.com/brainsmatter with a capital B and capital M. If you enjoyed the podcast, let your friends know, get them to listen as well. Listen to it in your school, in your car, on the way to work, wherever you feel like. And please vote on Podcast Sally or leave comments in iTunes as well. And before I go, I'll leave you with a quote from Albert Einstein. Two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity. And I'm not so sure about the universe. Hope you enjoyed the show. Bye for now.
I smart, I was thought, but I know I am not. Crow, I now know I'm eating like pie, an arrogant idiot high. I'm not as think as I smart, I am. I'm not as think as I smart, I am. I'm not as think as I thought I might be, for that's clear anybody to see.